Hello and welcome back to Bookish. I thought I would do something a little bit different today, and I guess this would just be more or less just straight booktube content. As you may know, if you watch my channel for a while, most of my reading before booktube was focused on 20th century American literature, and in an effort to kind of find a topic for a video, something I hadn't really talked about before, I went looking through my shelves for novels that I hadn't really talked about or addressed or discussed on my channel. I thought I'd share four of those with you, and they're all four by American authors. They're all four by American authors in the 20th century, some of which I think I've mentioned in passing on my channel before, but none of which I have really ever recommended. Just kind of as a disclaimer, before I go any further, these are all novels of the time period in which they're written, whether it was the 30s or the 1980s or the 40s or 50s. They're all from the time period in which they were written, so it is likely that all of them contain references, perhaps words, language, depictions that in today's world would be considered to be politically incorrect or would not be correct. I don't recall any extreme examples of that, but I just wanted to give you that warning going in, because we are talking about kind of, for the most part, early, mid 20th century American novels. So there are four novels here that I wanted to talk about. One I think is probably the one I've seen talked about most on BookTube, and that is is a Lonely Hunter by Carson McCullers. Carson McCullers, an incredibly gifted writer of one of my favorite short stories, The Jockey, which I believe I did a video on as a part of my short story series. She's a Southern writer, so there's that appeal to me, that kind of connection. And The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, it was her first novel. This novel is really a little bit difficult to describe in a way. It starts off as kind of a straightforward thing in which a character named, I believe his first name is John Singer, who is a deaf mute and lives with a friend of his, whose name I can't remember. He has a Greek last name, sorry, who's also deaf mute, and they kind of live together and they're friends. And when they're together, they have company. They can speak in American Sign Language to one another, and they can communicate. That changes for Singer when his friend becomes mentally unstable and has to be committed to an asylum, and that then leaves Singer isolated again. I don't think there's anything particularly subtle about the idea of a deaf mute being somewhat isolated, almost literally cut off from communication. But then the rest of the novel really focuses on four other characters and their relationship to Singer, and each one in some ways uses Singer, I think, as a way to ease their own isolation. The one who stands out to me most, and I think this is probably in part maybe related to the movie. This, by the way, may be one of the oldest movie tie-in covers I own. But the character of Mick Kelly, I think her first name was Margaret, is a tomboy who has a lot of potential, but we know is never going to meet that potential because of the crushing poverty of her family. She has brothers to whom she's really hard on, and while she seems like she's going to kind of go on being a nonconformist and someone who kind of breaks the mold, in the end, she's forced to conform. And I think, if you know anything about Carson McCullers' biography, she herself was dealt with a lot of mental health issues, made more than one suicide attempt, had a husband who committed suicide, divorced that husband initially to pursue lesbian relationships relatively unsuccessfully in terms of being satisfied. That there might be some elements of McCullers obviously in this book, since it is her first novel. But there are other characters as well who kind of represent types of characters, or I don't know how I would put it, like stereotypes of American characters who also in some ways are reflected or use Singer or are connected to Singer. And so while he ceases to kind of be the driver of the narrative, he is there as a presence, someone who all these people connect to, however successfully or unsuccessfully. And I think it's a really powerful novel. That's my memory of it. The second novel I want to mention is Appointment in Samara by John O'Hara. O'Hara was really is today an almost, I think, forgotten American writer, which is kind of surprising because there was a time in which a lot of people thought he would be the next American to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, whatever amount of literary cachet you give to that or not. But he was really a prolific short story writer, and I'm pretty sure he had more stories published in the New Yorker than any other, and is kind of one of the people who helped create the New Yorker style of story. But he also published novels, two of which were relatively scandalous. This one, Appointment in Samara, being the least scandalous. The other one, Butterfield 8, which I believe was made into a movie starring Elizabeth Taylor, was really scandalous. But Appointment in Samara refers to an old Mesopotamian folktale. That's it, in which a man attempts to avoid death, who he accidentally meets in a marketplace in Baghdad by going to Samara, and we later find out that when he saw death in Baghdad, death looked at him surprised and threateningly, which caused the man to feel like death was after him. And so he went to Samara, and we later find out that death reacted that way because death had an appointment to meet him in Samara later that day. And so it's really, the title refers to kind of a fated sense of doom that people bring about, maybe their own doom through their actions, and certainly the main character in Appointment in Samara does that. His name is Julian English, and O'Hara really kind of creates or focuses or writes a story in a really interesting kind of oblique way. We don't really meet Julian until a while in the book, and then we just kind of get references to him, and slowly we pick up things about Julian and his character, about perhaps his unhappy marriage, about his business, and essentially what happens over the course of the novel is that Julian takes actions which essentially doom him. But I really think it's very good. It's gritty. It's direct. It's not a happy novel. Neither is The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. Matter of fact, I don't have a lot of happy novels on this list. The third novel I want to talk about is the one I think I've mentioned before, that in this novel I really like, and that's The Man with the Golden Arm by Nelson Algren. Nelson Algren was a World War II veteran in the late 40s, right after the war. He began writing. He became a member of a writing society, which included our community of writers and artists, which included Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre. He had an affair with Simone de Beauvoir for a while, as well as other kind of prominent figures in the literary and art scenes. The Man with the Golden Arm is his most famous novel. It was made into a movie also, starring Frank Sinatra later. But The Man with the Golden Arm is an incredibly intense, gritty, social protest, anti-poverty kind of novel that's set in Chicago. It involves a character who's known as Frankie Machine, and he's called Frankie Machine because he is a really talented card dealer, and he makes his money by dealing cards in kind of illegal poker games in essentially like illegal casinos. He's also a talented drummer who dreams about being a jazz drummer, but he has a morphine addiction, which he acquired in the Army after being wounded during World War II. He has a morphine addiction, and that puts stress on his finances. It puts stresses on his relationship with his wife, who may or may not have been paralyzed as a result of a drunk driving accident with Frankie at the wheel of the car. He has trouble with the police. This leads to tragedy, and again, trigger warnings for suicide and suicide ideation and drug use, etc. Just a really great, gritty novel, and Algren goes on to be kind of one of the last, or one of the major, I think, social protest, anti-poverty kind of writers of the 50s, 60s. The last novel I want to mention is In Country by Bobbie and Mason. I'm relatively sure the only time I've shown this is to show it as an example of a movie tie-in cover. I can't remember. Somebody did a video asking, how many movie tie-in cover books do you have, and I think this is one I mentioned. This was made into a movie in the 1980s, starring Bruce Willis, among others. Bobbie Ann Mason is the author of this novel. She is a Kentucky-born writer who, has had an interesting writing career. She's written novels. She's written a lot of short stories, published in major, literary magazines with short story markets like the New Yorker, the Atlantic, and others. In Country is by far her most, I think, successful book, as it was made into a movie. And this is, I think, a really good book and I've been talking about generational novels and about how none of them spoke to me or none of them really kind of affected me. And I'm not, I don't share a lot in common with the characters here in Country, but it is clearly a 1980s novel in the sense that, and I don't know if people don't remember this or don't know this who weren't alive in the 80s. But in the 80s, we were really obsessed with Vietnam. There are all kinds of movies about Vietnam, all kinds of books about Vietnam, all kinds of television specials about Vietnam. This is the decade in which we really began to be aware of how badly Vietnam War veterans have been treated. A lot of the horror stories about Vietnam were coming out. In the 1970s, we had all kinds of stuff and news about Agent Orange. And In Country is a novel about the effects of Vietnam on American people. It centers on a character named Samantha Hughes, whose father was killed in Vietnam. She lives with her uncle, who was a Vietnam veteran, and I think today we'd clearly say he's suffering effects, the PTSD. He's struggling with addiction issues and focus issues and ability to get on with his life issues. Samantha doesn't live with her mother, who's remarried and has another child. She lives with her uncle Emmett. And they kind of get along with her grandmother. They kind of create this kind of stuck together family unit, which functions. But Emmett's situation and the death of Samantha's father are constantly something that's hanging over the family. And Samantha becomes determined to find out about her father and about her father's experience in Vietnam. And she eventually finds her father's diary and reads what he had to say about Vietnam. And she's very upset, and she finds there are lots of things in there that make her not like her father very much. And she goes on trying to understand why her father was the way he was during Vietnam. And in the end, Emmett kind of gets himself together and decides they're going to go visit the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. They're going to go to the wall and find Sam's father's name on the wall. And they do this, and it's kind of this moment of catharsis and emotional healing, which kind of, taps into really the way in which the Vietnam Memorial, the wall, kind of affected veterans and how it became this kind of really important symbol in Washington, D.C. and in kind of, dealing with memories of Vietnam. I thought this was a really good novel. I think I've only seen parts of the movie, but I really like this, and I would recommend that novel. I'd recommend all these novels, by the way, if you haven't read them. So, if you've read these novels or you have comments or thoughts or whatever, please leave those in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching.